All right, we will go ahead and get started. So this is Chris Berry, and we do these weekly wisdom webinars every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, unless I'm traveling for work, which I have been basically every other week for the last couple of days. For continued education stuff. So I always like to start with a positive focus, something positive that happened over the previous week. And before I do that, if you do have any questions, again, this is for you. Please put it in the Q&A section so I can make sure to address it. And today I actually only had one question submitted ahead of time. So if you do have something that's floating around in your head that you have a question on from a legal, financial, or tax standpoint, and you want a certified financial planner, certified law attorney to answer that question, please put it in the Q&A section. And again, this is just general advice. I want to see how it applies to your situation. Make sure to set up some time for us to chat or talk about it. So I always like to start with the positive focus. We start our team meetings that way, start our family dinner that way, something positive that happens. And for me, a personal one, I had a hip replacement, total hip replacement a year ago. So March 9th of last year. And a friend of mine reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to try to make a comeback to basketball? It's been like 7 years since I played basketball. And we had this group of probably about 20, 25 guys who would play at 5:15 in the morning at Lifetime Gym, and decided to give it a whirl. And my body really hurts, but I haven't killed myself. So back to playing a little bit of basketball, which is fun. And shows the power of medical technology, where I can do that even on a total hip replacement, which is makes me happy. So that's good. So again, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. And then also just a heads up, I'll be traveling again next week for another work conference. So it seems like there's a lot of work conferences right now, but that shouldn't be the last one for a while. So we're back to the normal, usual Wednesday schedules. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Whoops, I don't want that to get rid of that. There we go. All right. And so here's a question. Besides the promissory note, what's the best way to lend money to children and have them pay the estate or deduct from their inheritance the loan? Now the daughter wants to buy a house before it's sold. So this is something that actually comes up more than you'd think. The idea is, okay, let's say we have husband and wife, and let's say they have 3 kids. And let's say they want to do an estate plan. So God forbid something happens to them, it goes equally to the 3 kids. Kind of makes sense, right? So we want to make sure it ends up being equal. But let's say one of the children, okay, so they want to buy a house. Maybe they don't have the money to afford it right now. You could do a promissory note and then assign the promissory note to the trust. So let's say that they set up a trust. So, but they don't want the kid to have to like pay him back while they're alive. They just want to make sure that it's deducted from the estate upon death. So what we would do is part of the trust is we would build in some provisions to say like any outstanding loans would be deducted from the inheritance. And one of the things we could do is like create a separate schedule. A lot of times we already have Schedule A, which talks about personal property, but we might call it like Schedule B. So mom and dad could update Schedule B at any time, and then it's just incorporated into the trust. So let's say each kid was getting normally 500,000, 500,000, 500,000. But let's say the loan to help buy the house was 100,000. Okay. Well, now if that loan was still existing, then this person would get 400,000, and then they would get the 550 and 550. So it would be basically reduced from whatever their inheritance is. And that's something that could easily be built in or amended to any existing trusts. And then we like to build in flexibility where we say whatever outstanding loans is seen on like Schedule B, so that if the kid does pay it back or something like that, that would be reflected. And then their inheritance, like let's say they paid back 25,000 already. So then it would just be reduced by the 75,000. So it's pretty easy to do. It's just something that could be baked into the trust or the estate plan to say that we just reduce their inheritance by whatever is outstanding, with the remainder going to the other children. So pretty straightforward. And again, that was the only question I had submitted ahead of time. Beyond tax and estate planning, can you summarize any newer financial planning services your team provides? Yeah, let me see if I have something here handy. Yep, yeah. So we help clients with legal, financial, and tax planning. And so legal entity protection, a lot of times that's where we start, like the different types of trust. That helps determine which direction we want to go in terms of if we set up an asset protection trust, now we know that we're going to have to fund that somehow, pulling money from the IRAs, pay taxes, things like that. So we think that's super important. And then as you get into moving into retirement, so a lot of the clients we're helping are transitioning from the accumulation phase where it's all about accumulating as much as possible. Now it's moving into preservation and distribution. And so now we're figuring out, okay, what is that income plan in retirement? How do we replace that income plan, those wages that we had while we're working? How do we use Social Security, pension, whatever other assets we have to make sure that the money lasts at least as long as we do? And then obviously wealth management is a piece of it. How do we invest the assets in a way that we're comfortable with given the volatility of the markets? A big thing that we're doing is a lot of tax planning. And this is one of the biggest value adds that we can help our clients with, is looking at not just tax preparation, but tax planning. What are the things, given the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the $30 trillion in debt that we have as a country, what can we do to try to put more money in your pocket, more money for your children versus leaving it to the IRS? And then healthcare and long-term care planning. It's always been one of our big focal points. And then asset protection, leaving a legacy, as well as charitable planning. So really what we're doing is we're integrating legal, financial, and tax planning all under one roof, where a lot of times where people get advice, well, first you have different levels of kind of service. So first you have what we call vendors. So this is where you can, it's kind of do it yourself. So this is like, all right, I'm going to get some mutual funds at Vanguard, right? We even see this in the estate planning world, where everyone that walks in gets the same exact trust, just like some boilerplate trust. This is okay, I'm going to manage my money at Fidelity, right? You're just using them as a vendor. Like we use vendors too, like we use TD Ameritrade as our main custodian. Then you have your investment advisors. So these are people like Edward Jones or Merrill Lynch, and what they're doing is they're just putting together a portfolio, but they're not giving you any type of legal, financial, or tax advice, versus what we're trying to do, or what we're doing for our clients, is holistic advice, where we're coordinating the legal, financial, and tax plans so you have a unified plan that's in your best interest. So it's true planning, because a lot of times the type of legal plan is going to help define maybe what our tax planning objectives are, and then our investment plan as well. Like the way that you invest inside of a castle trust is different than the way you invest inside of an IRA. And your average person at Edward Jones, not to pick on them, but any investment advisor where they're just focusing on, okay, what's your risk profile, and then we'll put together a portfolio. Yeah, that's important, but you're missing some of the opportunities, especially on the tax planning front. So if you want to see how kind of we can help you, one of the best things that we could do is actually just give our office a call, and we can send you a copy of our book, Retirement and Legacy, Creating a Retirement Legacy Blueprint. It's only about 100 pages, but it goes over our planning process and all the ways that we can help our clients. So hopefully that was helpful. Does a Tax Cuts and Jobs Act affect personal deductions on cap? So yeah, so question is getting to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act runs from 2018 to 2025. And again, this is one of the biggest tax planning opportunities right now. And basically what happens is that when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act sunsets, so some laws are built in so that they sunset, meaning that just based off a certain time, it reverts back to what it was before. So yeah, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act sunsets, everything reverts back to prior rules, including SALTs and personal deductions, where now that standard deduction is going to drop much lower. So those are things taken into account. The biggest thing with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is just understanding that in 2025, your taxes are going up across the board about 3 to 4%. And so that's where we've been looking at tax brackets of 10%, 12, 22, 24, 32 plus. Like if you're at the 22% tax bracket, which a lot of people are just kind of naturally, that's going to 25%. 24 is going to 28%. So if you have IRA money, understand that when you pull money out, you're going to be taxed on. And I would rather be taxed at 22 or 24% now versus waiting until the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires and we're taxed at 25 and 28%. And especially when we're doing this in an intelligent manner over time, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of your assets, that we can save you in terms of taxes by just looking at things like Roth conversions and other strategies to minimize taxes over your retirement and what you leave as a legacy. And then just continuing the thought of taxes, the one thing I wanted to bring up just to talk kind of big picture about was President Biden's latest tax plan, where, yeah, it's not going to affect a lot of people right now because at least the way it's proposed, it's only going to affect people with over $100 million worth of assets. So again, not something to be super worried about right now, but so President Biden's kind of newest tax proposal he's throwing out there. The one concern I have with these things is always like a slippery slope. So, and here's the concern with the latest tax proposal is he wants to tax like unrealized gains, which is kind of problematic. Now, granted, if you're just taxing only the 100 people who have $100 million of assets, fine, great, yeah. That's not going to affect anyone probably on this call, nor would it affect me. But my concern is, okay, if we do it for this level, then what's not to say that it's going to be done for people who have less wealth than that? And so this concept of like taxing unrealized gains, like the idea is that, okay, let's say you buy, and again, this is only, his proposal is only applying to what we would call the ultra wealthy. So it's not applying to really anyone on this call. But this concept is a little bit concerning if it gets more traction, because now, and we've talked about step up in basis and how President Biden was going over that going after that previously. But the concern here is, let's say you buy real estate for $100,000 and then it grows to $1 million in value. Typically, you're not going to pay any tax unless you sell, and that could be either short-term or long-term capital gains. But one of the things that is part of kind of his new proposal is to introduce this idea of unrealized gains of, okay, whatever the fair market value is, even if you don't sell, you have to pay the tax on it. And let's say the tax is 20% and now, or I can't do math in my head, but let's say the tax is $150,000 on these unrealized gains. You have to find the cash to be able to pay for it. Otherwise, you have to sell whatever that property is to pay off the taxes. So I just thought it was interesting that this was part of his latest proposal. Again, it's only affecting people with like more than $100 million, so it's not going to affect anyone on this call. But just the concept of taxing unrealized gains, where now people are going to be forced to liquidate some of their positions to help pay for taxes for things where they haven't even sold. It's a little befuddling. So it's just something that we're watching. I'm not a big fan of that as a concept. But that said, we're $30 trillion in debt, we're $30 trillion in debt, and that's going to be even larger with some of his budget proposals. So somehow they have to come up with the taxes. And taxing the ultra wealthy with its unrealized gains, maybe that's the answer, but I'm just concerned about unrealized gains being a potential way to tax for the rest of us. That could be really concerning. So that's something that just stood out to me with the latest proposal. And again, this isn't law or anything, it's just what they're talking about. Here's a question kind of along the same lines. Transfers at death over $1 million subject to capital gains. The answer is no. So one of President Biden's earlier proposals, I think last year, talked about that if you have more than $1 million in assets upon death, you lose the step up in basis, meaning that now the kids would have to pay taxes on anything they inherit that have grown. But right now we get step up in basis, and that tax proposal never went through. So to answer your question, no, there's no $1 million limits on capital gains upon death. So the only death tax or estate tax we have now is the $12 million estate tax, where if your estate is valued at more than $12 million as a single individual, you would have to pay, or your heirs would have to pay tax on it. The only other thing that your heirs would pay tax on would be pre-tax accounts like IRAs, and that's subject to the Secure Act, where they have to pay all the taxes within 10 years. Here's another question coming in. What is the best thing for my 90-year-old mom? So the question, we have 90-year-old mom. What is the best thing for my 90-year-old mom to do with the profit from the sale of her condo? Okay, so she sold her condo. She has moved into independent living. She should not need the money for a very long time. What tax implications are there? So mom's 90 years old. She sold her condo. So now she has this amount of cash that is what we call non-qualified, meaning the only tax you'd have to pay potentially is on capital gains. She should not need the money for a long time. So that's good. So a long time horizon. And what tax implications are there? Okay, so mom's 90, sold a condo, moved into independent living, apparently doesn't need the cash to pay for the independent living. What should she do with the money? Are there any tax implications? Bitcoin, put it all in. No, I'm just kidding. It's really, there's more that goes into it. So we say that she doesn't need it for a long time. What is a long time? Is that 2 years? Is that 10 years? Is that 20 years? Like a long time for someone who's investing when they're 30 is different than someone who's 90, obviously. My concern would be liquidity. If she were to need, say, more long-term care, like suffer a stroke or something like that, we want to be able to access the funds. So what I'd probably recommend is something that's relatively safe, liquid, conservative, depending on like the amount. Or a lot of times when we talk about like financial planning or what to do with our money, when we're talking about time horizons, we like to break it into buckets. And so like the now bucket is maybe what money would she need over the next year? And that should just be like in cash, okay? So whatever her expenses are, plus whatever emergency fund, that should probably be sitting in cash. And then if you can project out, say maybe years 1 through 5, we could call this a soon bucket. And this should be money that's kind of conservative, maybe income for her to replenish that now bucket. And then maybe, and again, if you're saying mom's 90, I'm not sure how much kind of later this really is, but years 5 plus. So if you think she's going to live past 5 years, then maybe this could be more of a moderate portfolio, more geared towards a little bit of growth, but I certainly wouldn't go crazy with that given that she's 90. So yeah, so hopefully that was helpful. Like I don't know the number she has or anything, but I wouldn't have all the money sitting in checking savings, because the concern there is, especially with inflation, right? If you look at the cost of gas, which is like doubled within the last year or so, they talk about inflation numbers being 7, 8, 9%, and having the money just sitting in a checking savings account, especially if it's a big chunk, that's probably not doing the best service. And so there's some maybe specific investment tools available. I don't want to get too much into like tools or products, but there are some options where you can get some guaranteed rates of return of maybe 2.5% or greater. depending on the situation. So the biggest thing would be in this situation, make sure the money's liquid. Make sure we can access it, because she might be 90 and healthy and independent living now, but Lord knows life could throw a curveball and all of a sudden she's looking at nursing home care, which could be $10,000 to $15,000 a month. And so we want the money liquid to be able to do some things at the last minute to try to protect those resources. So hopefully that was helpful. All right, any other questions? That's really all I had. I wanted to answer a couple of the questions and then just talk about the President Biden's latest tax proposal. Again, it's in its infancy. I don't see it necessarily going through, just like some of the other things that haven't really went through yet. But like I said, I've been banging this drum for a while. Like, I think taxes are one of the biggest threats and biggest opportunities right now. And so there's some things that we probably want to be able to do in your situation while the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act we're still operating in this environment, and especially before President Biden makes any potential changes. So that window is starting to close, where we've been talking about this since 2018 of taking advantage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the lower tax environment that we have right now. So again, if taking anything from that, that's probably the number one thing, is just think about taxes, not just tax preparation. You probably have a person or even a CPA. A lot of times they're just looking historically, versus we want to look forward. We don't want to look in the rearview mirror with regards to taxes. Like, we know we have a current tax structure where taxes are going up, plus they might go up much higher in the future. And you see President Biden with multiple tax proposals trying to look at ways to raise revenue for the government, because we're $30 trillion in debt, and now we have the whole Russia-Ukraine thing. So one of the biggest takeaways that you can have from this is just, what should I be doing from a tax perspective? And everyone's situation is a little bit different. Last call, we went over 5 different tax planning strategies. But if you want to see how this applies to your situation, just reach out to us. So, all right. So any other questions? Going once, going twice. Sold. All right. Remember, I'm going to be flying to Denver next week for another work conference. Again, continuing education. Being a certified financial planner, certified law attorney, I have to make sure I'm up to date on all of my continued ed. And also, it's great to be able to share strategies and with other advisors and attorneys. But we'll be back to it the following week, and I'll make sure to update the Zooms. So thank you so